Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into it's basically one of the earliest pieces of organizational literature you can find. We're talking about the Apostle Paul's advice to the church in Corinth from 1 Corinthians 11.
Right.
And on the surface, this chapter looks like it's just about, managing a church dinner.
It's just a simple gathering, yeah.
But what it really reveals are these surprisingly persistent and modern challenges of unity, of class division, and how hierarchy can just corrupt a shared purpose.
That's absolutely right. We're looking at how a really foundational Christian practice, the Lord's Supper, and the communal meal around it, the agape or love feast, went completely off the rails.
And it went off the rails in Corinth, which was this bustling, really status-conscious city.
Exactly. And our sources show us that this thing that was meant to be a symbol of perfect unity, it became a flashpoint for selfishness and, severe internal division.
So our mission today is to look at how this practice, which was designed for sharing and cohesion, became so dysfunctional. It's a classic case study in how a great idea can get destroyed by bad implementation. The question we're really trying to answer is the one Paul asks them. Whose dinner is this?
Precisely. Because if they actually understood the purpose, their conduct would have been totally different.
So let's start with that original purpose. The source material says this practice goes way back to the very beginning of the church. Believers eating together was like a core activity.
It was. And this meal, often called the love feast or agape, it served two absolutely vital functions. First, it was the main way they had fellowship, how they communicated and built that family bonds.
It was like spiritual team building.
Yes. But the second function was maybe even more critical for the organization's health. It was a direct, practical way to share resources with members who were poor. This meal was equity in action.
So it's a spiritual connection and a social welfare program all rolled into one. And it forces the wealthy and the poor to physically sit together, share the same food. I mean, imagine trying to mandate that today in a modern organization.
It's a very high bar. And that's why the spiritual part was so crucial. The Lord's Supper, Holy Communion, was meant to be the climax of this shared meal.
And this whole idea wasn't invented from scratch, right? It has deep roots.
Deep roots in the Jewish tradition of the Passover, yes. The Passover commemorates that moment God rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt.
Right, the 10th miracle.
God struck the firstborn, but he used the blood of a lamb on the doorposts as a sign of salvation, so death would pass over those homes. The feast celebrated that deliverance.
And so the early church takes that framework, the shared meal, and adapts it to commemorate Jesus Christ.
Exactly. The focus shifts from the lamb to Christ's sacrifice. They're remembering, this is my body given for you. This is the new covenant in my blood. The physical act of sharing food was directly tied to their spiritual foundation of shared salvation.
Given that really deep, meaningful foundation, I mean, a meal symbolizing selfless love and total unity, it makes the crisis in Corinth just, shocking.
It really does. The very thing designed to bring them together was tearing them apart.
And this is where the organizational critique really kicks in, because the problems Paul calls out they're depressingly familiar. You could see them in any modern nonprofit or corporation.
The first failure was, quite simply, factionalism. They were forming cliques. Instead of fellowshipping with the whole church family, they were splitting off into these exclusive groups, maybe based on social standing or who they admired.
That sounds exactly like silos in a company today. You have a company-wide event, but everyone just sits with their own department.
It's the same principle. They were reinforcing divisions instead of breaking them down.
Actively sabotaging the purpose.
Right, but the second problem was even worse. It was selfishness and just blatant class division. This is where the social hierarchy of Corinth just marched right into the church.
Okay, lay it out for us. What did that actually look like during the meal?
It was a problem of, scheduling and hoarding. The wealthy members, who had more leisure time, would arrive first. They'd bring all their amazing food and wine.
And just start without everyone else.
They would eat their fill, and as we'll see, drunk their fill long before the poorer members, laborers, slaves, could even get there after their work shifts ended.
So they're celebrating a meal about communal love while actively despising the poor. They brought their food, but made sure it only served their little circle.
It's a total betrayal of the meal's purpose. The source is clear. The poorer members would show up, tired and hungry, and find that everything had already been eaten.
It's humiliating.
It is. It turned the church into a stage for social stratification.
And on top of all that organizational misconduct, there was a third problem. drunkenness.
It's jaw-dropping, isn't it? The sources confirm some members were actually getting drunk at this supposedly sacred meal.
So for some it was a feast, and for others it was. It was an experience of shame.
The rules had just vanished. And this division at dinner was just a symptom of a much deeper spiritual rot in that community.
You know, it really gets to the bigger picture. It wasn't about the food. It was about their maturity, or lack of it. They might have thought of themselves as, veteran Christians, but their behavior was totally childish.
And Paul's response here is so important. He doesn't tell them to just cancel the love feast.
No, he doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No. He understood the value of the meal. He wanted to restore its meaning. It was supposed to build the church up, not cause embarrassment to its most vulnerable people.
He demanded they restructure the event so that social status couldn't corrupt it.
And that context brings us to this really big shift between the ancient church and the modern one. Back then, it was a full shared meal, just like Jesus at the Passover.
But today, in most churches, Holy Communion is purely symbolic. It's just the bread and the cup. The big communal meal is gone.
Right. And in theory, that removes the obvious opportunity for the rich to hoard food and leave the poor hungry at the table. But the organizational takeaway here is that even if the physical meal is gone, that temptation for hierarchy and division, it doesn't just disappear. It just hides.
It goes from being a division of physical food to a division of intangible status.
Precisely. So the core problem of human nature, our preference for status, it's still there. And you have to ask, where does it pop up in churches and organizations today?
We have to be on the lookout for creating divisions based on these external things, right? Like wealth or academic background, social status, even race or ethnicity.
Those become the new invisible barriers.
So it's like the wealthy members are still showing up first, but now they're showing up with their PhDs or their big investment portfolios, and it makes others feel smaller, even if no one is explicitly denied the little piece of bread.
That's a great way to put it. And the source material gives a really clear example of this with regional divisions, showing how universal this problem is. It talks about the temptation in some communities to create these subtle divides based on ethnic markers. Like in Taiwan, you might see groups like Taiwanese, Hakka, Aboriginal, Mainlanders.
And the specific groups don't really matter as much as the principle.
Not at all. The principle is that any social marker that lets people sort themselves into us and them, or better and worse, just poisons the message of unity.
Which puts the focus on being really proactive about fighting that status signaling. It reminds me of that example in the sources about the church logo from 1991.
Yes, a great illustration of intentional design. The logo had a cross in the middle, surrounded by 4 lines. The design was meant to show growth. The lines moved outwards for quantitative growth, and the colors changed from warm to cool for qualitative growth.
But the key part was the pastor's explanation that went with it.
It was crucial. The pastor was crystal clear. While those lines represented different groups in the church, no single line represented a superior ethnic group or a higher status. It was a visual declaration that everyone is God's family.
That's moving beyond just accepting diversity. That's actively resisting hierarchy.
It is. And that powerful idea of unity brings us right back to the sheer weight of communion itself. It proclaims that every single person, no matter their status, is a sinner redeemed by Christ's sacrifice, bought at a high price.
And that leads directly to Paul's core instruction in 1 Corinthians 11.28, which just cuts through all the mess. He says, man should examine himself and then eat the bread and drink the cup.
The focus is strictly inward.
It's all about self-reflection, not judging others. He's demanding personal, internal accountability before you even participate.
And he warns that if you don't reflect on your own sin and what Christ's body means, if you take part while you're still clinging to your factions and prejudices, you are, in his words, eating and drinking your own judgment.
Wow. So you're profaning the very symbol of unity.
Yes, and from a management perspective, it's fascinating. The responsibility is entirely on the individual. Paul is urging them to examine themselves, not to use this moment to critique the person sitting next to them.
Right.
The focus has to be vertical, between you and the divine master. Even if you think a fellow member is a lazy or hungry servant, their behavior is between them and God. The master hasn't authorized you to be their judge.
So your participation isn't based on how good you think your neighbor is?
Not at all. It's based on your own confession and belief. That completely levels the playing field, removes any justification for human hierarchy in that moment, and puts the focus squarely on God's mercy and our own accountability.
That was a really incredible deep dive. Taking this ancient text and seeing how it reveals these timeless organizational truths, Corinth shows us that true unity isn't just about sharing a space, it's about actively shedding factionalism, getting rid of class prejudice, and focusing on our own personal accountability.
And what really stands out to me is how much they struggled when the divisions were so physical and obvious. Who was eating, who was drunk, who was left hungry.
Yeah, you could see the problem right in front of you.
You could. So if those early Christians had such a hard time with unity, when their communion involved a full meal and sharing actual resources, we have to ask ourselves a question about our situation today.
And what question is that?
Well, how might our modern invisible status divisions, the weight of academic degrees, the subtle signals of wealth, the leverage of social influence, how might those manifest in our organizations where the meal is purely symbolic? If we don't have the visible sign of a starving brother or sister at the table, what subtle ways might we be repeating the exact same error as the Corinthians without even realizing we're creating these layers of separation where total familyhood is the goal? That's the thought we'll leave you with to explore.